Hey, this is just a quick reminder that May Astrology Night will be held on Friday night, as it's always the first Friday of each month, Friday night on May 5th at Soul Food Coffee House in Redmond, Washington. For those of you who are local to Seattle or to Redmond, stop on by. It's a fun event. By the way, I'd like to thank well over 100 people who attended the April Astrology Night. It was a lot of fun, and I look forward to seeing many of you again this month. If you don't live in the neighborhood or can't make it, it will be live streamed on YouTube, and it will be available for all of you afterwards to watch at your leisure. And again, I hope to see many of you on Friday, May 5th. Greetings all, this is Rick Levine with your May astrology forecast. And as always, before we get into the actual forecast itself, I do have a few announcements. I'll do my best to make these quick. First of all, it being May, I would like to remind everyone that Norwak, the Northwest Astrological Conference, will be on Memorial Day weekend. That is May 25th through the 29th here in Seattle. I say here in Seattle. As you may know, I live just outside of Seattle. But I know that the in-person attendance is either filling up fast or has already filled. However, I just want to remind you all that this is going to be a hybrid event, which means that there'll be a local event in attendance by many, and you can also participate online. And whether you attend in person or online, you get access to every lecture throughout the conference for 2 weeks after the actual conference itself. So it is a good deal, and I will be there. And as I've mentioned here before, I'll be hosting a little reception on Saturday evening, and there'll be more information at Norwak for those of you who attend, who want to join us, and we may even do a little bit of a live broadcast from that event. Anyhow, that is Norwak, May 25th through 29th. It's the 39th in Norwak. I think this is my 32nd or 33rd that I've attended. I will not be speaking there, but I certainly will be in attendance this year. Okay, secondly, Omega Institute. Magical place just north of New York City by a couple of hours, an hour and a half or so, in Rhinebeck, New York. And on the weekend of June 30th to July 2nd, which is technically July 4th weekend here in the United States. I'm not sure how that works. But that weekend, I will be joining 4 other amazing astrologers, Maurice Fernandez, Lynn Bell, Anne Orderly, and Rachel Lang, and we will be together and separately presenting a weekend called Astrology, Consciousness, and the Great Shift. And we will be basically following individual and intertwined threads of thought that hopefully will weave a bit of a cosmic tapestry and give you, participants a sense of where we are in the big scheme of things. Now, I should also mention that aside from that weekend, I will be back at Omega on the weekend of October 13th through the 15th with Rachel Lang, and together we will be presenting a weekend workshop called Liberating Venus, Love, and Abundance. And this is going to be focusing on awakening the power to receive using astrology. And I'm looking forward to that. I'll have more on that later on. But I'm just putting that reminder out there in case you want to go to Omega but can't make the June-July weekend. Then the last thing I want to mention here is the December 6th through the 16th. I know I've been talking about this for a little bit here on these monthlies, but I will be leading a 10-day retreat in Goa, India, which is an initiation into astrology. And whether you're a beginner, intermediate, advanced, or even a professional, there'll be plenty here for everyone. And I've been a regular speaker for Heaven and Earth workshops. In fact, this is my 11th astrology retreat that I will be doing with Heaven and Earth workshops. And in some ways, this week or 10 days will be combining the best of my teachings over the years. And whether you're just curious about astrology and want to learn more, or whether you're really digging deep, this is going to be an immersion. Not only lectures, but we're going to be doing experiential work, astrodrama, planet walks. We're going to be doing a lot of exercises and ritual that embodies the actual planets themselves. And I encourage you, if you're possibly interested in this, to don't put this off, because we already have well over 20 students and we're going to cap it at 40. It's a private retreat center, an Ayurvedic healing spa just up from the beach, a few-minute walk down to the beach. It's a very, very magical spot, and I hope to see many of you there. But if you're interested, dig in now while there's still room, because it will sell out undoubtedly. Like I said, we have over 20 people already, and it's still 6 months away. So this is going to be an event, and I hope you can join us there. So that sums it up for the announcements. Like I said, it was going to be quick and dirty. And here we are at the beginning of May. I can't believe that this year is nearly half over. We have May and June. It's just crazy how fast things have flown by. But I do want to, before we take it day by day and on through the month, talking about some of the most important things, I want to just for a moment or two remind us all of where we are in the big scheme of things for this year. Because from the very beginning of the year, many of us astrologers have talked about how 2023 astrologically really wouldn't begin until March, late March, when Saturn moved into Pisces and Pluto moved into Aquarius. Well, obviously, those things have gone on, and through the month of April, we've actually had an entire month now with these new positions of these outer planets. But what's intriguing to me is how the plot thickens and begins to, on one hand, surge forward with absolute determination through the month of May. And on the other hand, we begin to get a bit of a stalling pattern at the same time. And the stalling pattern that I'm talking about comes from two places. Number one, we do have Mercury, which is retrograde. Mercury entered Taurus back at the beginning of April, and it turned retrograde at about 15 and a half degrees of Taurus on April 22nd. So here, as we open May, Mercury is retrograde. In fact, Mercury has retrograded back to about 11 and a half degrees. By the way, I am recording this on the afternoon of April 30th. But on tomorrow, on May 1st, Mercury is at 11 and a half degrees of Taurus, and it is at the same position as the sun. It is Cazimi, or in the heart of the sun, where I want to start the month with, and we can actually look at a chart for May 1st. And again, as a reminder for those of you who may be new here, I always use an Aries rising chart because the rising sign is technically the horizon. The ascendant is the eastern horizon. And because you who are viewing this are all over the sphere, the globe of Earth, I don't know what your horizon is. And therefore, we've taken that out of the equation so that the houses simply correspond with the signs. The first house here is Aries, the second house Taurus, etc. It's just an easy way to look at the mundane or world astrology separated from a horizon. We do see here, though, on May 1st, and when I have a chart up like I do now, whenever I say today, I mean not the today that I'm recording this on, April 30th, but I mean the chart that we're looking at. So that as we look at today's chart for May 1st, we can see that Mercury and the Sun are aligned, Mercury retrograding back into the conjunction with the Sun, which is actually exact at 4:27 p.m. this afternoon. The other thing, though, that I think is absolutely significant for the month of May is that we begin the month with a stationary Pluto. Now, technically, Pluto, which has been moving direct, and it moved into Aquarius back in March after having been in Capricorn for 15 years, Pluto is as of today, May 1st, technically retrograde or stationary retrograde. It's at that point of where a planet, like a pendulum, changing directions. In order for it to change directions, it has to slow, come to a stop, and then begin to pick up speed the other way. Now, for a planet like Mercury, it does that within a day or two, but Pluto actually has been at 0 degrees of Aquarius and 22 minutes. Remember, a minute is 1/60th of a degree. Pluto has been at 0 degrees of Aquarius and 22 minutes from April 27th, and it doesn't move 1 minute of arc to 0 Aquarius 23 minutes until May 6th. So what we have is, even though today technically is the day that Pluto turns retrograde, the fact of the matter is Pluto ain't moving. Now, for those of you who have studied with me, you know that one of my axioms is that the slower moving the planet, the more potency, the more power it has, which is why Pluto has such power, because it moves slower than the other planets. But even when a fast planet like Mercury changes directions, or at least apparently changes directions, it needs to slow down. And when it slows down, it eventually stops in order to change direction. And that's where it's most potent. And we're going to come back to Mercury in just a moment. But right now we're focused on Pluto, which is not moving for almost 2 weeks. It's holding its position. So Pluto right now is commanding a lot more energy in the sky than it might seem if we're just looking at the aspects to it. But what's intriguing is that throughout the month, there are aspects that are created to Pluto. In particular, I think what may be the most singular, most powerful aspect of the month of May is when Jupiter makes a square to Pluto. Now, Jupiter, remember, tipped into Aries. It went back into Pisces in 2022, and then it moved back into Aries in December. And from January, February, March, April, Jupiter has been whizzing through Aries. And on May 16, Jupiter enters Taurus. Now, because Pluto is at 0 degrees of Aquarius, and by the 16th, it will be back to 0 degrees and 18 minutes. That's just 4 minutes of arc. That's like 1/15th of a degree. That's how little Pluto is moving. But by mid-May, Pluto will be at 0 degrees of Aquarius and about 0 1/4 of a degree. And so as Jupiter moves into Taurus on May 16th, Taurus fixed sign, Pluto in Aquarius fixed sign, Jupiter will square Pluto. Now, we're feeling that already, but this is going to come to a crescendo in the middle of the month at the exact square when Jupiter moves into Taurus on the 16th and it squares Pluto exactly on the 17th. This is hugely profound and powerful, especially because Pluto ain't moving. It ain't going nowhere. It's holding a position, and this position is very significant, and yet it also may feel like a bit of a stall in some ways. And then we couple that with the fact that we've had Mercury retrograde. Now let's come back to the chart on May 1st, and we can see that Mercury has already, by May 1st, retrograded back from 15.5 degrees to 11 degrees, lining up with the sun. When Mercury lines up exactly with the sun, it's like our will, the sun, our consciousness, the sun, is lined up with our words, our communication, our thoughts. But this is an inferior conjunction, meaning that Mercury is in between the Earth and the sun. If I were to draw a straight line from the Earth to the sun, I would have to pass through the orbit of Mercury to get there. Now, when Mercury is direct, it's on the far side of the sun, and that's called a superior conjunction. The difference is that when Mercury is inside the sun, even though our thoughts can be lined up directly with our will and with our consciousness, it's difficult to get them out beyond the sun. It's difficult to get them out in the open. And it may be just because there's so much going on internally, it sometimes is difficult to know where to jump in and where to start our external stream of communication, which often happens with retrograde planets in general, because retrogrades, as we know, mean that the planet is closer to Earth than it is at other times in its cycle, and therefore the planet is louder. It's like a radio station nearby versus one far away, which makes the energy sometimes more difficult to incorporate and to bring into balance because it's so loud. And like Mercury retrograde, I've sometimes used the image of hyperactivity in a person where our mind is running so fast. And how do we treat, and I'm not saying that that this is always the right treatment, but how do we deal with the symptoms of hyperactivity? We use an amphetamine-based derivative like Ritalin or something like that actually speeds up the mind even more until it shuts down. And I think often with a retrograde planet like this retrograde Mercury cycle that we're in now, and Pluto that's coming into its retrograde cycle now, there's a feeling like there's so much going on that we just can't express it, and we tend to shut it down or put it in denial or close it off, and that's where the problems begin. And so it's really important that even though Mercury is retrograde for the first half of the month, again, it turns direct on the 14th, so we have 2 weeks of May where Mercury is retrograde. It's important that we just keep our intellectual mental flow in process and realize that even if it feels like there's so much going on, that we don't need to bring something to finality right now, because that's often the danger of a Mercury retrograde. We feel such a sense of urgency that we make decisions that we would be better off if we just slowed the energy down and held on to things a little bit longer before expressing them. Now, with Mercury in Taurus, and also, of course, the sun in Taurus, the North Node's been in Taurus already for about a year. It will be moving, retrograding back out of Taurus into Aries later on. But right now we have the North Node of the moon, the sun, Mercury, and Uranus all in Taurus. And there's this sense of determination. There's this sense of like the cows coming back to the barn to be milked at night. There's this sense that nothing's going to stop us from getting to where we're going. However, it may be frustrating because we're not going as fast as we were when the sun and when Mercury was moving through Aries. Things have slowed down, but there's a sense of methodical determination that will get us to where we're going eventually. And we'll see things pick up a little bit when Mercury turns direct mid-month. But even when Mercury turns direct on the 14th, at 5 degrees of Taurus, we need to remember that Mercury won't move out of its shadow, that area where it went first direct, then retrograde, and then direct as it does on the 14th. Mercury won't be moving into new territory until the 31st of May, because Mercury turned retrograde on April 22nd at 15.5 degrees of Taurus. And even though Mercury turns direct on May 14th at 5, almost 6 degrees of Taurus, it doesn't reach 15.5 degrees of Taurus again until the 31st of May. So even though we're moving forward in the second half of May, we're still moving through territory that feels familiar, but it also may feel like we're not getting to where we're going yet. And it's going to be doubly important as Mercury turns direct mid-month to remember that we do not need to rush things as much as it might feel like we want to, especially as Jupiter is finishing up its run in Aries, where we've been rewarded for impromptu, we've been rewarded for impulsive actions, we've been rewarded for saying yes before we know what the whole deal is. When Jupiter moves into Taurus, we will not be rewarded for saying yes. Instead, and that's also right around the same time that Mercury turns direct, we will be rewarded for only starting those things that we can finish. So that's a bit of the overlay of the month. I would also just mention that as May begins, we're moving toward a full moon, and this full moon is a lunar eclipse following the Aries solar eclipse last week. And so this is going to be the cap of that eclipse season, where still things can be happening that may seem a bit disruptive, but they also may bring things to light that are out of balance. In some ways, I think eclipses often function in a slightly Uranian manner, and this particular eclipse coming up that we'll get to in a moment certainly has that Uranian overtone. So here we are on May 1st, and we can see that Jupiter is at the tail end of Aries, and we can see that the Sun and Mercury are together in Taurus. And remember also that the Sun moves about a degree a day, so that Sun is going to actually reach Uranus. It actually does it on midday on May 9th. Because on the 1st, it's about 8 degrees, a little bit more like 7 degrees away from Uranus in Taurus. Uranus will edge on a little bit, and the Sun will catch up to Uranus. And so this is part of the excitement, or looming, pending excitement, and yet frustration because we're not there. Remember also that when Mercury turned retrograde, Mercury was in Taurus and it had almost reached Uranus. It had bumped up close enough to Uranus that it was almost like right there, just a couple degrees away. And then it turned retrograde, and had Mercury reached Uranus, there would have been lightning-like awakenings, mental energy. And yet, because that Mercury turned retrograde, we have more frustration building around that excitement that was never quite culminated. So we may see some of that as the Sun moves towards Uranus, and the Moon moves towards its opposition to Uranus, which will happen around the eclipse. We'll get to that in just a moment. By the 2nd, we do have the Sun making a half a square with Neptune. We have a few half squares and what I call square and a half, semi-squares and sesqui-squares on May 2nd and 3rd. Mercury makes a half square with Venus, and then Mars makes a square and a half with Saturn. This may be, again, this all heightens frustration. This heightens the energy of feeling like our physical impulses, Mars, in some way are blocked by a wall, by resistance, Saturn. And yet, if we can slow down with that energy, that can be very productive. That's up through May 4th. By the time we get to May 4th, we also see that Venus moving along. Venus is moving toward the end of Gemini, and Venus will actually move into Cancer on the 7th. And also, by May 4th, we have Venus making a couple of very significant aspects on the same day. We have Venus making a square with Neptune, which can heighten our sense of fantasy, illusion, even romantic energy. It kind of pumps up the dreams and the imagination. And yet it can get in the way a little bit if we don't discern what is dream, imagination, fantasy from what is real. And remember, we're just coming off of a very real reality check from Saturn making that sesquisquare from Mars making that sesquisquare with Saturn on the 3rd. But the other thing that happens on the 4th is that while Venus is making that square to Neptune, it's also making a sextile or approaching a sextile to Jupiter. That's not exact until later this evening on the 4th. But Venus and Jupiter were, to the ancients, the benefics. They were the cosmic good guys. And in a way, when Venus makes a sextile with Jupiter, this is like the sweetness and the pleasure and the fulfillment of desire. Venus getting support from Jupiter, which is the rewards. Jupiter is more. It's the bigger, better, more planet. And of course, the danger of a Venus conjunction, sextile, square, or opposition to Jupiter is that bigger, better, more isn't always better, because too much of a good thing can be toxic. And in fact, the ancient the ancient doctors remind us that anything in the right proportion can be medicinal or curative, whereas even those things which are curative in the wrong proportion can be toxic or poisonous. So we do need to pay attention that on May 4th, with the Venus squared to Neptune and that sense of imagination and illusion coming into the picture, that we don't pump it too full of potential and mistake it for reality and then turn it into reality and then go, whoops, too much of a good thing may be detrimental. This is all feeding into May 5th, when we actually have the eclipse. This is a full moon lunar eclipse, partial eclipse, and it occurs at 10:34 a.m. All times that I give here are Pacific Daylight Time, and so you can adjust your time zone accordingly. But at 10:34 a.m., the moon is at 14 degrees 58 minutes of Scorpio. That's just about 15 degrees of Scorpio. And so we have this energy of the moon opposing the sun that is kind of dynamic, because the full moon in Scorpio, sometimes called the Wesak moon, is the full moon under which Buddha was allegedly born, enlightened, and died. There's the sense of the stability of the sun in Taurus being reflected by the mental volatility and power and passion of the moon in Scorpio, that in an enlightened state is actually, let's say, overcome or managed, maybe is sometimes a better way to look at that. This eclipse, though, is significant because it is approaching, the full moon is approaching its opposition to Uranus, and the sun is approaching its conjunction to Uranus. And so we may see some suddenness here of action going on, that, again, because eclipses, lunar eclipses in particular, often release energy from the past. We may actually see ourselves, whether it be in a personal relationship or in some relationship that we have with some idea or pattern or job, or whether it's in a family relationship, or whether it's more global issues, whether it's political or global, geographical conflicts or something. There's sometimes a dropping of the past, a letting go, where we can actually cut a tie, or sometimes where we are, in fact, forced to. So this is all on May 5th. It's a very powerful transition point, and it also marks the ending of the eclipse season. However, eclipses do have lingering impact, and so this degree of that 15 degrees Scorpio, 15 degrees of Taurus is kind of a charged degree, and that will maintain importance for us throughout the spring and the summer. As we move to May 7th, we see that Venus, which has inched along, has moved into the sign of Cancer, and Venus moves into Cancer at 7:24 a.m. Pacific time, and it will remain in Cancer for the rest of the month and well into June. Venus in Cancer is different than Venus in Gemini. Remember, we came off of a period where Venus was in Taurus. Venus was at home. Venus loves being in Taurus. It's her primary home sign. When Venus moved into Gemini, in some ways we were freed a little bit from some previous patterns because Venus in Gemini is easygoing. It's curious. Venus in Gemini encourages us to just kind of go with the flow, to interact. It doesn't look for as much meaning or even as much sensual pleasure as it did when it was in Taurus. But when Venus moves out of Gemini, air sign, into Cancer, a water sign, we feel ourselves grounded emotionally a bit more. And here's the intriguing thing. Mars was in Gemini forever, for, well over 6 months, from late last August all the way through March of this year. And Mars now moving through Cancer from the end of March through April. Mars actually leaves Cancer on May 21st. Now, here's the thing to consider, that on May 7th, Venus enters Cancer, and Mars is already there, and Mars doesn't leave Cancer until May 21st, which means we have 2 weeks of Venus and Mars, the cosmic lovers. Venus, what we like, what we want, what we desire. Mars is how we get it. Venus is the idea of pleasure, and Mars is the physicality of that engagement. And with both Venus and Mars in Cancer, there's a bit of sweetness that is added to this mix, but also a bit of nostalgia. Remember, Cancer likes holding on to things. Cancer's natural affinity to the moon. The moon reflects the light of the sun. When Venus and Mars are in Cancer, rather than going out and conquering the world or finding a new relationship or getting a new job, it's almost like we want to settle into where we are and kind of milk it, to use another Cancerian word. We want to get the most we can from it. We want to feel safe and secure. And so we do have this energy for a bulk of the month, from the 7th, when Venus moves into Cancer, all the way until the 21st, when Mars moves out of Cancer into Leo. Actually, it's on the 20th, not the 21st. It's booted up another notch on the 21st when the Sun moves out of Taurus and into Gemini. We'll get there in just a moment. Back here to the 7th, we can see now that Venus is in Cancer. But whenever a planet changes signs these days, because Pluto is so close to the cusp between Cancer and Aquarius. Remember, Pluto is now technically retrograde. It's retrograded an entire 1/60th of a degree in the first week of May. 1/60th of a degree, 1 minute of arc from 0 degrees Aquarius 22 minutes to 0 degrees Aquarius 21 minutes. But when a planet changes signs, it's going to make an aspect to Pluto. So Venus moving into Cancer, Cancer is quincunx to Aquarius, and this is another annoyance and irritation, because there's this sense of the deeper understanding of what's going on, the undertow, the undercurrent, the underworld of Pluto, kind of still in that new age community-minded Aquarius sign. And with Venus moving into Cancer, there's this sense of wanting to withdraw, of wanting to kind of come into a place of personal safety. And so there's a bit of an annoying energy. I don't know what that right word. Annoyance. There's the word. There's a bit of annoyance between these two energies now as Venus forms this short-lived quincunx with Pluto. And that is exact the day that Venus moves into Cancer and then makes that quincunx with Pluto on the 7th. By the 9th, we have the Sun, which, remember, had been moving about a little bit less than 1 degree a day toward its conjunction with Uranus. And by the 9th, Uranus is almost at 19 degrees of Taurus, and the Sun, as it reaches that 18 degrees and 56 minutes, just 4 minutes short of 19 degrees, it makes this exact alignment with Uranus. There's a bit of noise here, of excitement, of lightning striking. Remember, Uranus is called the Great Awakener. And it's the Great Awakener in the same way that when lightning strikes, it activates, it awakens, it electrically charges all the plants and animals. When it hits the ground, it's like this zzz, like a wake-up call. And in fact, electricity in our body is what creates our nervous system. And when lightning strikes, it's almost like all the lights go on, and for a moment, even if it's in the middle of a dark, stormy night, when that lightning strikes, for a split second, we can see everything. And that's the same thing that happens when we go, I got a great idea. When something happens and we just get this brilliant breakthrough, it's like metaphysical or mental lightning striking, and which is why Uranus is called the Great Awakener. And the thing is that when lightning strikes, when we can see everything, even if it's dark a moment or a split second later, we know where everything is. And from that standpoint, Uranus can change the ball game because it basically gives us the ability to increase our awareness. And I think that when the Sun once a year lines up with Uranus for a day, give it a day coming and going for a day or two or three, which would be the 8th, 9th, 10th in that period of time of May, this is a time when we can learn new things if we're open to them. And it's important to remember that we want to be open, because if we try to shut down what it is that Uranus is trying to show us, the lightning simply has to strike harder. Uranus will always win in the end, meaning that nothing will prevent the lightning from striking in order to create equilibrium or balance. In our personal lives, often the hardest things we have to deal with are the things that we've consciously suppressed, that we just don't want to attend to, or things that we don't even know we're suppressing or that we are repressing unconsciously. And often, therefore, it takes the lightning, the awakening, is much more volatile, much more destructive even. So we look at the Sun's conjunction with Uranus as a culmination in some ways of the of the lunar eclipse that occurred on May 5th. And so these days, I think, are very profound days in May, and I think that we can see some pretty significant change. Even when we go to the 10th, we look at Venus, which, remember, was making a quincunx with Pluto as it moved into Cancer on the 7th. But by the 10th, Venus is making a half square with Uranus. And in fact, this half square with Uranus is another round of excitement. It's another round of the lightning striking. But here it's Venus, and it's more personal. It's more
It's more emotional because Venus is in Cancer. And so again, here there's this something can happen out of the blue and it might feel disruptive, but depending upon how open we are to change, we might not like this at all and want to shut down and pull back and slip into denial. On the other hand, if we can just even entertain the idea, it might be very exhilarating and adrenaline producing and exciting. But the key to understand this half square from Venus to Uranus is to remember that just because something feels exhilarating and exciting, just because we're attracted, Venus, to something that's new and different and out of our normal comfort zone, that would be Uranus. Remember, Venus in Cancer wants to stay in its comfort zone. Uranus wants to shatter comfort zones and present what's new and different. And so as this occurs, the one thing that we need to remember is just because we allow our emotions to respond, just because we allow our mind to entertain the thought, and maybe even to take it a step further in our mind, it doesn't mean we need to act on it. And this is the important thing about hard aspects to Uranus in general. And that is that we don't need to make every fantasy or every awareness actually something that becomes a turning point in our life. Having said that, these are a few important days because of the eclipse that's opposing Uranus, and then the sun's conjunction with Uranus. Venus is half square to Uranus, and yet it's followed by the 12th. It's followed by Mercury. Remember, Mercury retrograding is slowing down, and Mercury on the 12th is making sextiles to Saturn and to Venus. Now, how does this work? Well, Venus is coming into a trine to Saturn that's also exact later in the day. So on the 12th, this is almost like the antidote to whatever it is that stirred up our energies over the past week. Because as Venus makes its trine to Saturn late at night, 11:56 p.m. on the West Coast, that'll be early morning on the East Coast of the United States, and even on into the next day morning in Western Europe. Venus's trine to Saturn gives us the ability to stabilize that which maybe led us to an edge or even over an edge. Venus's sextile to Saturn gives us the ability to slow down enough to make something real, to make something have longevity. It's like an emotional endurance. But here's the other piece, and that is that Mercury, which is at it's backed up to 6 degrees of Taurus. And Mercury at 6 degrees of Taurus is less than a half a degree away from where Mercury will actually make its station direct at 5 degrees Taurus, 51 minutes. In other words, Mercury is slowing down so much that between today, May 12th, and the day that it actually turns direct on the 14th, Mercury barely moves 1/20th of a degree. It's technically not stationary, but it is, for all practical purposes, it's barely moving. It's barely moving at all. So what we have is Mercury holding still, which Saturn likes because Saturn is the planet of stability. So we have Mercury holding still, making a sextile to Saturn in Pisces on one side, and making a sextile to Venus on the other side while Venus is coming into a trine to Saturn. I think that this is a few day period of time. It's really a weekend. It's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday even, where we may not be the most active. There may not be huge movement, but what we do, I think, can have long-lasting ramifications, especially because Mercury is stationary direct on the 14th. Let's move this ahead a day or two to the 14th. by the way, during that period of time on the 13th, the moon moves through Pisces. It lines up with Saturn. Again, when the moon moves through early Pisces, midday, early and midday, May 13th on Saturday, the moon is not only going to line up with Saturn, it's also going to make a sextile with Mercury and a trine to Venus. This is all pretty sweet energy, even though Saturn's involved. In some ways, this is the upside of Saturn. This really gives us the ability to make use of that stabilizing energy. But it gets more interesting than that, because although on the 14th, Mercury has backed up as far as it's going to go, it's back to 15 degrees. It's back to 5 degrees and 51 minutes of Taurus. It's stationary now, but it's not moving backwards anymore, but it's not moving forward yet. It's stationed. And the word station is a good Saturn word in general, because Saturn basically slows things down enough to make them real. And so this whole period of time, I think, is incredibly powerful, incredibly useful. But we also now need to keep our eye on Mars, which has been day by day creeping along toward the end of Cancer. And as Mars on the 15th, on the 15th, it reaches 27 degrees of Cancer. And as it does, it makes a trine with Neptune. Now, remember, we had a Venus square Neptune earlier, which was fantasy and illusion and maybe even fake news to some extent. It's being misled or delusional. When Mars is trine Saturn, it still can have those elements of actions based on delusion. I mean, it can be there. But in its higher form, Mars trine Neptune is the ability to move with grace. It's the magic that we can bring into physicality that almost seems like it's not physical. There's like a metaphysical, a dreaminess, a state of something that's beyond the three-dimensional world, and yet Mars is involved. We're still moving with it. This is exact 6:44 a.m. on May 15th, but I think this energy will hold with us again for a few days. I think this whole period of time is intriguingly important and sweet, and yet there is something else that is cooking, and that is that these are the last days of Jupiter in Aries, which may make us feel like if we don't do it now, we're going to lose the chance to do it. This is not the case, although it may feel like it. It's not the case, because once Jupiter moves into Taurus on May 16th, there's Jupiter in 0 degrees 00 Taurus on May 16th. It may seem like we've lost the opportunity to make good of something in the present moment. However, the trade-off is Jupiter in Taurus ensures, well, it's not a guarantee, no money back guarantee, but it increases the chances of our being able to finish whatever it is that we start. Remember, when Jupiter was in Aries, it's like everything was reacted to in the present moment. When Jupiter was in Aries, if an opportunity came along, we knew we had to grab it now. When Jupiter is in Taurus, we're not under that pressure. We have a better sense of being able to only pursue those things which we feel like we can finish what we start. And so there's a real change of energy mid-month that kind of is heightened by all this, the eclipse and the Uranian energy. And then when Jupiter moves into Taurus, two things happen. First of all, the energy does slow down a bit. We see that there's a longer path to take, and that if we keep showing up, I always think of William Blake's line, if the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise. There's this sense of, if we persist, if we do that kind of that dogged persistence of holding on and just kind of like we'll get there, we will. Having said that, When Jupiter moves into Taurus, we begin to feel much more acutely something which has been building for days. And that is that Jupiter has been within orb of being squared to Pluto. But remember, when Jupiter changes signs from Aries into Taurus, Taurus, fixed sign, Aquarius, Pluto and Aquarius, fixed sign. This is the same that we've seen before with other planets when they change signs. All of a sudden now we're aware of this Jupiter and its square to Pluto. And the thing about Jupiter square Pluto is that this brings into our awareness those things which have been undercover. Remember, Pluto is about all the struggles and all the volatility of what happens out of sight. Pluto, in some ways, is a classic out of sight, out of mind. The problem, though, is that things that are out of sight, things that are not within our mind, have a lot of impact on us, even though we don't know about it. And so as Jupiter squares Pluto, it can bring up to the surface because Jupiter's action is expansion. If you think of a bubble or a balloon, blowing up a balloon, you know, that balloon, as it expands, that's Jupiter. As a bubble that's very tiny under a lot of pressure, let's say 70 or 80 feet, scuba diving. When you're scuba diving and you breathe out and you're at 50, 60 feet and the air bubble, you breathe out and the little air bubbles come out. As those air bubbles rise to the surface, they expand. And as they reach the top, instead of being a little air bubble going pop, they become a big air bubble that goes poof. And so often when Jupiter squares Pluto, those things which have been repressed, that have been underground, that have been hidden, that are coming out, come out with a loud awakening. Well, no, I don't want to use that word because that's a Uranian word. But it's a loud effect. It's more than just when it was hidden. There's this sense of mid-month when Jupiter moves into Taurus and squares Pluto. We're getting another round of awareness around all those things, again, in our personal lives and or politically, for example, that are coming out into the open that we can no longer hide. So I think that this is an important piece of the month, and I would imagine that we will see from the 7th and on through the middle of the month more and more things that were either secret or that people weren't aware of, or just things coming out into the open. And I think that this is going to be important. On the 17th, as Jupiter moves further on, it's still moving slowly, only moving 1/4 of a degree a day, but you can see that Jupiter midday on the 17th is now within just 3 minutes of orb of squaring Pluto, and the exact square occurs at 6:09 p.m. But these are slow-moving planets, and we're going to feel this days in advance and days afterward also. But I think that the key right around the 17th is quite important. By the 18th, the sun moving through Taurus is reaching its end of the run in Taurus. And remember, Taurus is fixed earth. The fixed signs are the middle of the season, like the cardinal signs start the season. So Aries was the season starter of spring, and Taurus is as dense as spring gets. That was the middle of spring. But now, as the sun is approaching the end of Taurus, and by May 21st, it leaves Taurus and enters Gemini. And then we have a month of it's not summer yet, but spring is kind of like beginning to turn into summer, at least in the northern hemisphere in many places. But what we're getting here on May 17th and then on the 18th is that the sun, as it's reaching the latter degrees of Taurus, it makes a sextile with Neptune. And this sextile to Neptune is very important because, again, it gives us the ability to reach into imagination, to pull out that higher side of Neptune rather than just being misled by it. But the intriguing thing is that we're not going to get to just run free free-flowing in fantasy world, because on May 18th, Mercury, which has been inching direct, but just barely, and remember, Mercury turned direct just 4 days ago. And as it stationed, it was kind of in that place where it was sextiling Saturn and sextiling Venus, right in that middle point. But the exact direct sextile, or Mercury direct sextile to Saturn, occurs on May 18th. So through this whole period of time, it's like we can trust what we're thinking. Why? I mean, there are times when our thoughts are just crazy and we shouldn't trust them. We may get some brilliant ideas, but we get some really stupid ones at the same time. But when Mercury is in Taurus, we may not get as many ideas. We may not be as fast to run off into new territory mentally, but especially while Mercury is making that exact sextile on May 18th to Saturn, while the Sun is making a sextile to Neptune, it's a real balance between fantasy and reality that I think can be very useful. By the time we get to the 19th, we can see, by the way, that the moon has entered into Taurus. And even if we go back to May 17th, the moon actually enters Taurus at 5:27 a.m. on the 17th. And as we follow that moon along, we can see that the moon actually will catch up to the sun on May 19th. That is a new moon in Taurus. It occurs at 8:53 a.m. and it occurs at 28 degrees Taurus in 25 minutes. That's 28.5 degrees for all practical purposes. And this new moon at 28 degrees of Taurus is important for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's not an eclipse. Eclipse season is over. But this is a huge new moon. I think this new moon is even more important than the eclipse 2 weeks ago on May 5th. Why do I say that? Well, first of all, look at Mars. Mars is now moved along to the last degree of Cancer. You know, Mars is not thrilled about being in Cancer. Although I think it does get a little bit of a hard judgment, bad rap from the traditional dignity or lack of dignity that Mars has, a technical term, dignity or debility, that Mars has in Cancer, because when Mars is not in its home sign of Aries, that's its domicile, Mars's favorite place to be, where it's exalted like a visiting king in a guest's castle where the king is treated special. Mars is exalted when it's in Capricorn. When any planet is opposite its exalted sign, it's said to be in its fall. In other words, it's not at home, and it's far away from a place where it's loved. And so when Mars is in Cancer in its fall, it theoretically has a harder time expressing. Now, I would temper this with a little bit of patriarchal awareness that in Western society, Mars is functional when it's taking over a smaller country, or when it's a corporation that is successfully eating smaller corporations or making lots of profit, maybe on the backs of workers or other people. So Mars does have a bit of a negativity implied, because it's often associated, and rightfully so, with assertion and or aggression. And the line between assertion and aggression can be tricky. In Cancer, Mars is not interested in going out and conquering any smaller nations or beating up less privileged people and taking what they have. Mars is not interested in furthering its cause at the expense of others. Instead, Mars in Cancer is interested in defending its own safety and security. Now, that can become aberrated too, because I can be so insecure that your presence, just even in the same country, makes me crazy, and I have to go out and find you and do something nasty to you to get rid of you. That's an aberrated Mars. In Cancer, Mars is more healthy when it's protecting its home and family and loved ones, when it's acting in ways within its own safe boundaries that are safe. So we have Venus and Mars that I spoke about earlier, which have been for a couple of weeks both in the sign of Cancer. And now as Mars gets to the very, very, very last degree of Cancer, and the moon is right on the edge of becoming new. And actually, for that matter, we actually look at the new moon at 28.5 degrees of Taurus. We look at how potent this moon is because it is at the point of Thales, which is the point that is a release point on any opposition that sextiles one side of the opposition and trines the other. And the opposition here that in fact on May 19th is still building, it's technically not fully completed until Mars moves into Leo tomorrow on the 20th, and then it will oppose Pluto also only moments after it moves into, well, about 12 hours. Mars moves into Leo, and we'll get to this in just a moment. We'll look at this chart in just a moment. Mars moves into Leo at 8:30 a.m. Pacific time on the 20th, and then it opposes Pluto at exactly at 8 p.m., 8:11 p.m. And so, but this is already by the new moon, Mars is 1/2 a degree. No, it's less than a degree. It's about 3/4 of a degree from being exactly perfected in its opposition to Pluto, even though it's out of modality because Mars is not yet in the fixed sign of Leo. By the time that Mars moves into Leo, and we're just looking still at the new moon itself, we can see how the new moon is releasing this building pressure from the Mars opposed Pluto. But remember Jupiter having just moved into Taurus. And so we have Mars not only coming into an opposition to Pluto, but also coming into a square with Jupiter. And remember I said earlier that the Jupiter square Pluto is the most important aspect of the month. Well, this new moon in Taurus is the culmination of that energy, because it gives us a way to release that energy, although those last degrees of Taurus are not necessarily historically a nice place in the zodiac, because it's in the Pleiades. It's right around the fixed star of Algol, which traditionally is the star that is related to the beheaded Medusa. It's in traditional astrology, it's often considered to be death by decapitation. Now, it's important to understand that Ptolemy, some 2,000 plus years ago, said that Algol, the end of Taurus, was the most treacherous star in the sky. But again, we have a little bit of a patriarchal story here, because Medusa was actually, a virgin priestess, and she was attacked, followed, and raped by Neptune, and she was punished. And she was punished by turning her hair into snakes, and so horrifying that no man would ever approach her. In fact, if a man looked at her, he would be turned to stone. And so this idea of Medusa as a Gargon as a horrific character is in some ways tied up to a patriarchal male judgment. I think it's important to understand that. And yet there's something about those ending degrees of Taurus which allows for a transition of cutting, again, something off from the past. So we had this full moon eclipse that allowed us or required us to make that cut. And now we have this new moon that is sextile to Mars and trined to Pluto, while Jupiter is forming a T-square to that building Mars opposed Pluto. Incredibly potent. Let's go here now to the 20th, and we can see that now the Mars has moved to 0 degrees of Leo, and we can see more clearly the Mars opposed Pluto with Jupiter at the apex of that T-square. And even though the moon has moved on into Gemini, by noon on the 20th, the sun is still at 29.5 degrees of Taurus, and it's still holding that position of release. You see that point of Thales, just like an apex point on a T-square, the Jupiter, even Jupiter node for that matter, that's a point of conflict. It's a point of disruption and a need to resolve the dynamic conflict of energy. But the point of Thales, that is sextile one side of the opposition, in this case sextile to Mars, the sun sextile Mars, and trine to the other side, in this case trine to Pluto, gives us a way to move the energy that actually doesn't necessarily need to be quite as disruptive as the square point. So by the 21st, we not only have the sun now moved into Gemini, making its exact trine with Pluto on the 21st in the morning. I mean, the sun moves into Gemini at just a few minutes after midnight, at 12:09 a.m. on the 21st, and the sun exactly trines Pluto at 7 a.m., 6:58 a.m. Meanwhile, we also have the sun making that exact sextile to Mars now. No, the sun's trine to Pluto is at 6:58, almost 7 a.m., and the sun's sextile to Mars is not until 11 p.m., 10:56 p.m. But still, this energy is holding over, and we're reaping the benefits of the there was a word I'm looking for. The smoothness isn't quite right. At the inevitability of the expression of the changes that are occurring as the sun moves into Gemini and picks up on the trine to Pluto and the sextile to Mars. We do have a little bit of a complicating factor that normally wouldn't be complicated, and that is, remember, the Mars opposing Pluto is huge. That was exact on the 20th at night, at 8 o'clock at night. But Mars is also coming into the square to Jupiter. That's not exact until the 22nd in the evening. And this has to do with more than enough is not enough until more than enough is too much. In other words, on a positive note, this can be getting psyched up for some sort of athletic contest. Mars-Jupiter square is the exuberance that we bring to a situation that really allows us to shine, to perform, because Mars is that engagement. It's in Leo. It's about the show. It's about the drama. It's about the performance. It's about the intention that Mars has to follow through. Remember, Mars opposing Pluto, this is a power struggle. This is like a really deep power struggle between all those things that are plutonic. A plutocracy, a government that's run by people who are so wealthy. A plutocracy is a government by people who have money, but it's not just cash. We're talking about people who own the people who own everything. This is the underground, the hidden, the owning of the gold in ancient times, the owning of the gold mines, the diamond mines, the copper mines, the silver mines. This was the real money. And when Mars opposes Pluto, we want that fight. We want to bring it out into the open. And the question is Mars powerful enough to create damage to this undertow of energy that's so powerful that you never get to see it all in its fullness? However, we have an extenuating circumstance right now, and that is that Jupiter is in the mix, giving Mars even more intention, more power, more feistiness to its fight, and Jupiter is squaring Pluto at the same time, even a day or two after the exact square, because Jupiter moves pretty slowly. This same T-square is in play. So on the 22nd, we have this energy that things are out of whack, and yet there's still movement. We'll see how this plays out, but I would look for some real events in personal life, in global situations. This is going to be a very profound, I think, very profound period of time. So on the 24th, we have Chiron quite active. We haven't seen Chiron active that much this month. In April, it was very active because we had still have Chiron moving through Aries. And in April, we had a variety of planets making conjunctions and moving through Aries also. But now by the end of May, on the 24th and onto the 25th, we have the Sun making a half square with Chiron and then making a half square with Venus, meaning Venus is making a square with Chiron. Again, when we have three planets combined up in the same little energy, this really strengthens that. And here we may have to face some wounds. Here we may see the need to pay reparations for something that we've done in the past. We need to, in some way, come to grips with something that happened that is now come back up. It's come full cycle, and it's not going to let us through it until we deal with this energy. And I still think this may be tied to the whole Jupiter, Pluto, Mars, T-square by the 24th as the moon is moving through Leo. By midday, the moon is actually entering into that T-square period by first opposing Pluto, then squaring Jupiter, and then conjoining Mars, all by midday on the 24th, while at the same time we have that Chiron semi-square by the Sun and square by Venus. Potent day for disruption and for the potential for healing, but I don't think the healing is going to be easy. This is certainly, in some ways, it's like pouring salt on a wound. It's like these things are coming out into the open. By the 26th, we have Venus now making a sextile with Uranus. And again, there's movement. We're moving away from whatever that energy was mid-month. We're getting that excitement from Venus to Uranus, where again it's the adrenaline. We're attracted to something new, something different, and again we don't need to act on it. But I think in some ways there's potential that's showing. And interestingly enough, during the same period of time, Mars is reaching a point where it is what's called the bendings of the nodes. Mars on the 26th is exactly square to the north and south node of the moon. And this is also a dynamic point. As we're reaching the end of the month, we're seeing a lot of things that are kind of the stresses and strains are going somewhere. They're moving. And I think that we're having to deal with the inevitable here, whatever that means. By the time we get to the 27th, Venus is brought back into focus. It's now making a square and a half to Saturn. Remember, we saw that Venus trine Saturn back mid-month around the 12th. And now we're getting Venus making a square and a half. The trine to Saturn was 120 degrees. The square and a half is 135 degrees. This is not as much fun. Venus making that square and a half to Saturn. It's also at the same point in time, by the 28th, that's on the 27th, on the 28th, the Sun is squaring Saturn. We now see this dynamic little pattern between Venus, the Sun, and Saturn. And instead of having smoothly flowing points, that point of Thales, instead we're seeing the Sun now square Saturn. It's having a hard time dealing with the stability. The moon moving through Virgo on the 27th, and the opening quarter, the first quarter moon, the opening square. We see at around noon on the 27th, the moon in Virgo opposing Saturn and squaring the Sun, while in fact the Venus is making a half square to the Sun and a square and a half to Saturn. In fact, Venus is even being half squared by the moon at the same time. This is a stressful situation. 26th, 27th, 28th, the Sun actually hits the exact square to Saturn. early in the day, 3:45 a.m. The sun is exactly square Saturn, and Mercury is also on the 28th, moving into a half square to Neptune. Once again, we have this whole delusional thing kind of coming in, but it's Mercury Neptune again. It's being misled by something incorrect, or by incorrect facts, or we're trying to mislead someone else. But there's this kind of the energy really picks up by the end of the month. It's really extraordinary how much change there is in the month of May. And by the time we get to the end of May, things are really quite a bit different than they were at the beginning, because we're really getting a sense that we are going somewhere. Now, remember, for the last couple of months, I've been talking about how we're in new territory and we feel like we're going somewhere, but we don't know where we're going. Well, I think that by the end of May, we have a sense of direction. It may not be our ultimate direction, but I think May is a bit about getting our bearings. I think May is a little bit about getting our feet back on the ground with Jupiter moving into Taurus, and yet really needing to come to grips with those things which we either already knew about that were kind of still a bit hidden, or those things which we weren't ready to admit which were still hidden, or those things which we absolutely didn't even know. There's stuff that's coming out now more and more. And again, because Pluto barely moves at all through the entire month of May, and because of Pluto's place in this in this very potent T-square at the end of the month, where we have Mars opposed Pluto that's being squared by Jupiter, this, I think, is going to just be an overwhelmingly dynamic time. I'll have more to say about this in the mid-month update. For those of you who are on Patreon, the $3 a month, you get the mid-month update. For those of you who are not, you can go to patreon.com, patreon.com/Rick Levine, and find out more. And whether or not you're on Patreon or get the mid-month update, I'll see many of you for the live stream of the Astrology Night on Friday night, May 5th, at 6:30 p.m. That's Pacific time. It will be then available on YouTube later on, but this will be live streamed on YouTube, and that will be my live forecast for the month and whatever else, including some charts. And by the way, for those of you who attended the April Astrology Night, it was a blast. I really appreciated you. We had over 100 people there. It was really a fun night. If you live in the Redmond area, I invite you to come out for this. It'll be a lot of fun again. And that's it for now. Be safe out there. Think cosmically, but make sure that even while your brain is entertaining the outer reaches of the cosmos, even when you're expanding your mind into whatever psychedelic mind expanding realms, cosmic realms, go ahead and think cosmically, but make sure that you bring it back to center and act locally. I'm Rick Levine.